Buddha was a master of being able to teach people.
Oh, Bante, excuse me. I'm sorry. There's a cat inside?
Yes, okay.
Oh.
You would, in various times, take people with various impressions of the world or beliefs of the world, and slowly, systematically, sort of bring them around to understanding what wholesome states were, what skillful states were. Most frequently, the most accessible entrance for people who had never engaged with the spiritual path before. The most accessible place to start to teach them was about generosity. And generosity is, it's like he taught people about life, about the world, about different mental states and the consequences of our actions. But really, everything he was teaching was a window into people's experience. And really all of the teachings, like all of the different aspects of the teachings are a way or a transition or window into that wholesome experience. And so the key about generosity is even if somebody doesn't really understand exactly what they're doing, or they don't really know why they're doing it, it still plants a wholesome seed. And the key of generosity, the wholesome state underlying generosity, is really two different aspects. There's an aspect of well wishing. It doesn't really count as generosity unless one's giving something selflessly for their benefit. There's an aspect of well wishing, of acting for someone's well being. And the other aspect of generosity is there's an aspect of release, an aspect of letting go. Something that was yours, was one of your possessions that for one reason or another you accumulated. Just letting that thing go. De-identifying with it. And so those are really what the Buddha is pointing at is in that first layer of just acts of generosity, acts of well-wishing, selfless service. It's in one sense moving out of a self-centered view of things, hoarding mentality or accumulating mentality, and moving more and more towards an experience of like well-wishing and harmlessness and release. The more we can isolate and experience what it feels to give, even recollecting times in the past where we've given where it's had a particular resonance or it's had a particular impact on ourselves, that we felt either someone giving something to us or even better, something that we've given to others. The both sides, both the sort of gratitude for receiving something and the well-wishing that comes from giving something, they're both windows into that wholesome experience. And the more clearly we can move into that experience, wishing, release, calm, balance, the more consistently we can dwell there, the more the whole rest of the path becomes accessible. People often ask me for meditation advice, and usually I tell them something like, if you cultivate wholesome qualities for all the time before you're meditating, when you're not meditating, then the meditation will go much more smoothly when you sit down and meditate. So if one cultivates those wholesome qualities of wishing, patience, and release throughout one's life, and just goes through the world with a sense of like harmlessness and well-wishing. It might be energetic or it might be calm, but fundamentally all of those states are balanced. And so the more one cultivates generosity in one's daily life, even if it's just the intention of generosity, just like, who can I help today? How can I make someone's day a little better? And get familiar with the pleasurable experience of that. Like, it's the nature of it. It's a very nice feeling. fundamentally, the more one dwells there in that kindness and release, the more one sort of consciously or unconsciously cleaning up one's internal space, making it nice and calm and neat and tidy and pleasurable. Just a nice space to be in. And so when one wants to check in with what's going on inside, it becomes a natural move inwards towards one's body, towards one's feelings, towards one's psyche, different emotions that are arising. It's like one's been cultivating a clean slate, a beautiful internal world, pleasurable baseline inside itself. And more that space is opened up, and develops an awareness of what's going on inside, pays attention to what's going on in the body, feelings, psyche, different qualities that are arising. Just gets more familiar with how things feel, how different intentions feel, how different actions feel. And so when one sort of even thinks about like doing an act that's going to harm another being, once there's this sort of open experience of emotional awareness, one can just recognize that, oh, that feels bad. You know, it makes a harming, like killing an insect, or something like that. Just immediately feels like, ooh, I don't want to do that. Thinks the intention of stealing, having sexual misconduct, actions that are going to harm someone. One needs that. There's just an internal recognition. It's like, oh, that feels bad. I don't want to do that. It feels bad when one's doing it, but sometimes if one doesn't have a familiarity with what's going on inside, one doesn't realize that it's so fixated on the pleasure from outside that it sort of ignores the emotional resonance that it creates. The painful inner kind of conflict or inner turmoil that happens when we do something that we know is going to harm someone. So the more familiar one gets with the pleasure of kindness and compassion, the feeling of kindness and compassion, the stability, sustain of joy and pleasure that comes from kindness and compassion, the more the idea of harming any being, even in subtle ways, just things like telling a lie, speaking to divide people, speaking harshly or hatefully. Speaking lightly naturally starts to move away from those things. Just develops this internal recognition and the internal appreciation and awareness of the feeling that even words that harm someone else are going to just leave a mark. Sooner or later, there's going to be this experience of regret, remorse, that naturally come with those things. So that whole realm of it sounds simple, but just generosity and morality is normally would be where he would start. If someone had never heard the teaching before, sometimes he'd only tell them about generosity and morality. I thought that was the most important teaching for them. But even for everybody, if someone wasn't familiar with the teaching, he would normally start with generosity and morality. It was to develop this attunement with what we already know at a subconscious level, but we sometimes shut out at a conscious level or an intellectual level. When we've shut out our emotions, a lot of times we've shut them out for a reason. They're violent, or they don't allow us to move forward and make decisions, move on with our life. But when we do that, we also shut out this vast array of information that our subconscious mind has access to, which is quite simply how things feel, how it feels to do good, how it feels to do bad. The experience of feeling is a very connected one. And so it's where our intuition and subtle recognitions of different things, awareness of all that lies. And so kind of the first step towards reestablishing that connection to our own intuition or our own feeling or our own subconscious mind or psyche is creating a sort of a wholesome link or a wholesome action that allows us to open up that space and feel good and have a source of good feeling inside. One of the most common reasons that we shut out our emotions is because the emotions are frequently reactions to an internal pain. And because either the pain is so overwhelming or the reactions are so strong that we feel like the only way to rein them in is to shut and move on with our day as if they're not there. But actions of generosity, actions of morality, living a moral life, and sort of maintaining a clear line of things we won't do, and developing more and more actions, selfless actions of kindness, compassion, selfless service. It's like it opens up a channel to our internal world, to our emotional experience, to our psyche. It's like adding soothing lotion to our sometimes wounded and painful inner world. And if it's still too painful, then doing more and more good till the point it's a cumulative thing. The more one takes acts of generosity, the more, whether one's conscious of it or not, one's sort of bolstering that inner pleasurable feeling, that inner sort of stability and contentment. So yes. And so even if it's not ready to open up the box of emotions that come out when one opens up the subconscious mind, the psyche. Doing acts of good on a daily basis, regularly, all the opportunities one can. Could be small or large, could be just an intention. But all that creates a reservoir, storehouse of goodness and feeling good. So kind of dilutes that pain that sometimes we carry within us. And if one just spends one's life just doing good and just not doing bad, already that's a long way. Because a lot of times going straight for the deep, penetrative, facing all of our internal pain, it has to happen at some point. But the more we've developed that internal storehouse of goodness, of kindness, morality, the more that's sort of subtly becoming purified and sort of replacing the old pain with new seeds of stable pleasure. And so whether we're conscious of it or not, those sort of seeds of doing good throughout the day, throughout the year, throughout our lifetime, are all sort of laying the groundwork for being able to access more directly what's going on inside. And sometimes even that's difficult. Sometimes we have a lot of the habit of greed, the habit of selfishness, even just the subtle acts of generosity are difficult. And it takes time to realize that, the benefit of giving is so much more than the benefit of holding on to this thing. But initially it can be a struggle, and that struggle is already the process has begun. Like already the process of fighting the habit of accumulation, possessiveness, controlling, is starting to be unwound. Similarly, putting bounds on our actions, body, speech, and mind, like not stealing, sexual misconduct, not speaking lies, not speaking divisively, not speaking harsher, coarse words, speaking idly. All of that takes training. Is sort of checks on when our craving takes over and we speak unmindfully, we speak forgetting ourselves, we speak just out of impulse, we speak out of selfish or egoic motives. We speak out of desire, wanting to cover something up, or trying to make ourselves look good, or trying to be more safe, out of fear, or whatever. So even the sort of laying clear moral lines for ourselves, of like trying to come out of greed, of covetousness, trying to come out of hostility, and laying clear kind of lines on speech and action. Once one becomes pure, those become second nature. But initially, it takes a lot of training and consciousness and putting attention into restraining ourselves from those types of actions of body and speech that are going to even subtly harm something. Unintentionally we can't control, but at least all of those actions that we're taking intentionally, when the actions that we know are going to hurt someone in one way or another, and we kind of create clear lines for ourselves not to cross. And again, second nature, it becomes second nature once one develops this appreciation of how good kindness feels and how calm and sustainable it is in comparison with trying to accumulate the world, take immoral action. But initially it takes some training. It takes some moving out of more kind of greedy or selfish intentions and more into intentions of well-wishing. Let's let it go. Once one starts to cultivate that, have a basis of feeling good inside, and has a basis of morality, and has a basis of kindness, like naturally that's creating an internal experience that's nicer and nicer. It's like a space that you're able to move into and have access to with more and more ease. Inevitably, there's still going to be some reactions there, habits. But it's not like you don't avoid it like the plague anymore. It's sort of just, okay, this is work I'm gonna have to do. This mess in there that I have to deal with. So it becomes easier. Also, this sort of nice, peaceful, pleasurable internal space gives us the ability to start looking at the downsides and the drawbacks of the pleasures of the world. Not just the material things, but the sights, the sounds, the smells, the tastes, the touch, all the other people, all the pleasures that come from sensory experiences, from sensuality, from other people, from people thinking, applauding us, everything going according to how we like, jet setting all over the place to try to see beautiful things. Like the more one has an internal space that's calm and pleasurable and beautiful, the more one just doesn't need the external pleasures, and one can see like how much work and maintenance and conflict goes into trying to maintain them, and just can appreciate like, oh yeah, that's a lot of work. It's time kind of like I've been spending my whole life chasing after these things. And then the pleasure only lasts for 5 minutes. You have the tasty food, the beautiful new place, the new possession, the compliment, or the new promotion, or whatever. And one realizes, like, oh, okay, that's nice. Those are good things, pleasurable enough. But they only give me like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Day, a week of pleasure, and then the pleasure wears off, and more or less you still have your internal space. So you realize, like, okay, these are nice things when they happen, but the reality of the world is they don't always happen. You get ups and downs, you get possessions, and then you lose them. People say nice things about you, and then they say bad things about you, and that's the reality. Is the world's largely beyond our control. And spending extreme or inordinate amounts of time trying to control the world so that it conforms to our desires is just destined to not be a very good investment. it doesn't give us very much pleasure. On some level, like people need to work, do a job. But as far as the paycheck that we get at work is actually quite small in comparison to like the return of the goodness that we get to do, or whether it's at work or anywhere else. If we go through life with that wholesome, kind, compassionate, well-wishing, generous, selfless intention, that is offering us sort of this long-term well-being that persists not just through the life, but it's able to even continue with us after death. But these were what he was when he discussed the afterlife. Is that good actions were the main reason, the purity of morality and the generosity, the service, like all of those things are what's creating the quality or the vibration, the frequency, or but fundamentally, the quality of higher planes. That's what leads us into more heavenly experiences and existences after we die. And just the sheer absence of doing any harm, of not taking actions that we know are doing harm to other beings, that keeps us from sinking down. It's like kind of leaving all the taking handful actions. It's like taking on weight that's going to always lead to sinking. And making choices and living a moral life is like you're living out the consequences of your past weights, and so you're sort of naturally setting the old weights down, and then you're not taking on any new. So naturally, like by construction, can only be moving up. And the other thing, when one starts to become attuned to this wholesome frequency, this like subtle pleasure, subtle feeling that's running through the body that sort of resonates when we do good or when we do bad. With the more attuned we get with that, the more one starts to realize that the external things aren't the real story, aren't the major part of the story. We still operate in this material existence, and we have to look after our bodies and the base requisite. We earn money to have shelter, medical care, and food, clothes, but we start to realize like, oh, this isn't the real. These don't offer me much sustained happiness. These just give you a short-term high of happiness. It's like, oh, good, But the downsides start to become more clear. Like, okay, how much effort it takes to earn money, and how much. The more one fixates on trying to get the world to conform to one's own desires, the more one tends to come in conflict with other people. Because inevitably there are other people who want to conform the world to make the world conform to their desires. And so when one starts to look at all the conflict in the world, in our daily lives, our families, in our associates, at our work, and probes a little deeper to like what's actually the cause of this, it really usually comes down to greed and ego. The more we sort of move away from kind of both the things of the world and our own kind of attempts to preserve this sense of self, and to make only good things happen to it, the more it becomes clear those are actually what's motivating much of the conflict. It's interpersonal conflict or fight or violence or international conflict. The roots are usually greed and ego, the constant desire to possess, the desire to be better than others, or sometimes the resentment from feeling that one is inferior to others. And so the more one has this internal space, a wholesome internal space, you can look back at the whole cycle of accumulation, pursuing sense pleasures, trying to conform the world to one's own wishes, and just see how much work and tiresome it is, how much conflict it causes, the interpersonal or international conflict it engenders, and just that it's not worth it. You know, if that's all there were, if there were only the pleasure of the world, then you do the best you can. But that's just the beauty and the importance of generosity, kindness, well wishing. Is that these things are offering us consistently a source of pleasure that doesn't come from outside. A source of pleasure and a source of pleasure that's available to us at every without any material possessions, without any stimulation. You can find a quiet place and generate that kind of tension. No, more one starts to move away from pursuing sensual pleasures, organizing one's life around pursuing sensual pleasures. The more one starts to appreciate that renunciation itself has a lot of benefits. When one moves towards living more simply, with few desires, few wishes, few humbly, is that one's life becomes very simple and free, spacious. The sort of maybe the logical conclusion of renunciation is the life of a monk or a nun, but it doesn't need to get to that point to start experiencing the benefits of renunciation. It's just by construction. If you need less money to survive, if you need fewer possessions to survive, if you don't need to be having everyone praise you and think good things about you, to cultivate this sense of superiority, one has a lot more time and a lot more space and a lot more calm. So if one's only spending money on the necessary food, the necessary clothing, the necessary medical care and shelter, whatever other essential things one needs, one's living expenses become very, very low. Doesn't have very many costs, so one doesn't have to work as much. One can work less and dedicate oneself, whether it's to peace, meditation, those types of activities, or going through one's life doing whatever you want. Acting on that kind of impulse, just going through the world very gently and softly and kindly. Doing volunteer work or doing whatever speaks to one's is helping one become more pure, more clean, and more open, more free. And the other way that the renunciation sort of moves us closer and closer to the spiritual path. So there's this aspect that our lives are just simpler. It don't require as much work to sustain at a monetary external level. But also the less one's mind is going out to sense experience. Again, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the taste, the touch. So if one's kind of constantly pursuing the next stimuli, the next pleasurable sight, the next pleasurable sound, next pleasurable smell or taste or touch, it's constantly seeking. The nature of it is every time one grabs hold of an object, the mind goes out to that object. So it's pulled in that direction. And the more objects one grabs hold of across as one lives one's life, the more attachments, the more pulls, the more impulses one has seeded. And so the nature of one's life, the more one's pursued the pleasures of the world and attached to them, and each time that attachment falls away, the impulse is still there of like try to preserve it, try to contain it, try to recreate it. And so the more one's attached to the various stimuli in the world, the more one's constantly being pulled around and like lives in this tight, tense, worried, fearful experience of like trying to maintain all the sources of pleasure that are coming from the world and trying to have the mind go out and indulge in all of those various experiences. And by construction, that can't happen all the time. There's only one can only experience this thing at a time. And even as try as one might to surround oneself with every type of sensual pleasure that one's attached to, it just doesn't work. The nature of the world is it arises and passes away. It's not really within our control. It has to do with everyone else's decisions, life choices, and so the reality is we can't have it completely within our control. Even if we try and we succeed at having one person within our control, eventually they pass away or we pass away and we go our separate ways. So there's this constant cycle of like attachment and disappointment that comes from pursuing the things of the world, pursuing the experiences of the world, the pleasures of the world. And the abandoning of that also yields a type of pleasure and joy which is generally not recognized until one starts to give these things up. So the more, as pursuing sense pleasures agitates the mind, just the mind jumping around from all the different sense doors and sense objects, the abandoning of those pleasures of the world lead to a natural calming of mind. Just simply by not agitating the mind gets consistently. And so there's a sense of release. There's a sense of freedom that comes from not being attached. Just like, whether one physically gives it up, of course, there's the actual freedom when one physically gives it up. You're not responsible for it. You simply have a car and don't get attached to it, you're still responsible for that car, and that car is still going to get towed and it's going to be in your name. But if you actually give it away, then you really don't have any connection to that car anymore. Of course, like that with all of one's attachments and pleasure. So the more one gives up the attachments and sensual stimuli that feel good, and doesn't really delight in them anymore, it's just like, oh, this feels good. Okay, you move on with your day. It's sort of not a big deal. It's just like, okay, this is a pleasure that arises and passes away, but it's not going to last. If I get attached to it, it's just going to set me up for disappointment. Or somebody else wants it. It's just a conflict-ridden type of pleasure. So one consciously starts to move away from it. And again, that's easier and easier the more one starts to experience. Of course, the more good one's done, that's the stage, but the more one experiences the pleasure of releasing those things and the freedom that comes from releasing those things. And when one starts to get more and more familiar with the peace and the calm, that is the absence of that agitation. And that it feels good. It feels calm. It feels just much more tranquil and serene and pacific, even than the happiness of doing kind acts. So one has this just internal happiness. It doesn't need anything. Sort of profound happiness. And the more one moves away from those stimuli and allows the mind, the psyche, to settle, and settle, and settle. The more that happiness turns into a joy and a pleasure. A joy at the level of the mind and pleasure at the level of the feeling throughout one's body. And from that space, it's like it's why renunciation is so helpful and so frequently the Buddha recommended as life orientation. That once one starts to give up the pleasures of the senses, the world, one develops more and more of this sense of peace and stability. And from that stability, it just becomes much easier to be able to perceive everything, perceive all of the aspects of one's experience. So whether it's the pleasure of the body, or as the body relaxes and sort of dwells in this not agitated, not tight, not unattached state of mind, if the body relaxes, the pleasure kind of runs through the body. And one's able to perceive both the stimuli that one could always perceive, the sights, the sound, the smell, the taste, the touch. But also from that stable, calm, peaceful base, one has a much broader awareness available to the psyche. As one's not jumping around from object to object, one's able to sort of survey the landscape of everything that's happening in the context of one's experience. and both appreciate or understand or experience the sight, the sound, the perception of sight, as well as sound, the hearing, the perception of the hearing, smell, the nose, the smell, perceptions, the perception of smell, the tongue, the taste, the perception of the tongue, body, tangible thing, touch, the perception of the body. So those things are all sort of coming together moment to moment. The mind, the quality, the perception of mind. And so these things, these six sense doors are always coming together with their objects at all the time, at every time, every moment. And also triggering a feeling and a recognition. Pre-thought, pre-thinking, just a recognition of what that object is. See, okay, that's my friend, it's yellow, that's blue, that's permanent, that's impermanent. Me, that's not me. It has all of these recognitions being assigned non-verbally, just an internal remembering or recognition or association with the sense stimuli that we're receiving. And the other aspect that can be perceived in there is one can start to perceive the impermanence of it, either consciously or moment to moment. Like, or is it like in the long term or moment to moment? One can see or imagine or remember the nature of the body is to fall apart, or one can experience the subtle burn of one's body arising and passing away. One can see, let's say, a sight, a door, person, object, can see the recognition of it arising and passing away. See either the pixels of it, the experience of it, or the recognition. You can see each of these experiences, perceptions, and recognitions and feelings all arising and passing. And the more one can move into that space of just observation, partial observation, objective observation, neutral observation, and it starts to create space between this sense of identification and the object, sense of the momentum or the intention or the impulse that carries us back out to the object and the object itself. The more we see it as it's arising and passing away, and the more we can tell that there's a subtle burn there, and then there's a painful experience of holding on to it, of going out to it, of trying to keep it from falling away, and then the loss and the grief that comes from losing that thing which I was trying so desperately to hold on to. And one can see, like, the more distance one gets from it, or one lives in this space or dwells in this space of observation, the more intuitively one understands this isn't me, this isn't mine, this isn't myself, my soul, this persistent thing. It's just the flow. It's the flow of consequences from whatever I've done in my past. It's just all of the seeds coming to fruit of these associations were formed in the past, and now they're coming up as recognitions. These various painful or pleasurable seeds were good or bad deeds were planted in the past, and they're coming up as pleasurable or painful feelings, sensations. And these sort of attachments were formed in the past, and now they're coming up as these attachments and impulses, urges that are still in the moment. So one sees this whole flow coming together and cycling and cycling and cycling. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, recognition, feeling. Impulse. And one just is able to sort of untie oneself from this cycle, this tangle of sequence, this sort of row of dominoes that keeps going. But at each moment, as soon as one sees, like, oh, this craving and this impulse and this urge is leading me to attach to things that are burning up all the time, and it's this craving that's feeding this cycle of pain and aging and death and disappointment and despair, tension, stress, all of the cycle of every aspect of physical and emotional pain are tied to this craving and this attachment, this identifying with these objects which the nature tour has passed away. And so the more one sort of makes that connection that this craving is leading me towards the pain, it undercuts the craving, because the craving thought it was moving towards pleasure. It was seeing a pleasurable object and holding on to it so that it didn't die, it didn't pass away, it didn't separate itself from us. But the more we realize that seeking out that pleasure is only setting us up for more pain, the pain of its eventual loss, disintegration, the more it sort of naturally erodes away. But the motivation for it is seen through the ignorance that was motivating the craving. It dissolves. And so in that moment, the psyche doesn't want to follow the craving. It already recognizes, like, oh, that's an impulse that's only leading me towards bad places. Even though it thinks it's going to get pleasure out of it, long term, that's not going to work. It's going to set me up for disappointment over and over and over again. And so it just, as one sees through it, one sees the natural long-term consequence of that craving. See it, how it ties to various aspects of it and its experience. Because sometimes the craving is for a sight or a sound or a smell. Sometimes it's attaching to the recognition and the sense of me that comes with being right and everything. Sometimes it's associating and identifying with the feeling, whether it's a pleasurable feeling, whether it's a wholesome pleasurable feeling, unwholesome pleasurable feeling. But once it identifies with that feeling, then it sets itself up for disappointment, the ultimate disappointment when that feeling ends. And so each time that craving starts up again, when there's the wisdom that gets, the knowledge, the remembering of what we've learned. And with that connection, once those dots have been connected, one knows, okay, this is where cravings lead me. It leads to short-term pleasure and then long-term pain. And this is where release is leading me towards this open, expansive, free experience. that the more we get familiar with that experience of release, and that the freedom that it comes as a part of it, the experience of that freedom, the experience of that release, the more there's an intuition of like, oh yeah, there's a better way, there's a better alternative than trying to hold on to things that are destined to fall apart. There's a way out. I don't have to keep holding on to these things to get to a place of peace. The more one dwells in that space of release, not just of the material things or the sense experiences, but also of the sense of self, ego, or this identification with any of that, any of those aspects of experiences. The more we let go of those perceptions, recognitions, or feelings, or a form, or attachments, the more we let go of all of that, when we just move into a more and more familiar state of release, of letting go, freedom. And so it's each knot, each type, each tie is being unwound. And as that tie, as those ties, as those knots, as those bindings become undone, one just moves into a more and more expansive state of being. And moves less, like, moves into the subtle, within the material, that consciousness sense. And eventually, the ultimate goal that the Buddha was pointing at was that one comes to a point where craving comes to a stop. And craving is what's keeping the cycle going. One lives out the results of one's actions, even if one has for a moment no craving. There's still enough momentum of craving that there's still some place for the next perception to land. But when one comes to experience abandon craving on a more continuous basis, it's like initially the existence was this huge fire, and as one cuts away the possessiveness with generosity, morality, pursuit of sensual pleasures with renunciation, the fire gets smaller and smaller. It sort of naturally is dying down. It's not throwing the heaviest, hottest, most dense type of wood on it. And then as one moves towards more and more subtlety, starts letting go of ego in all of its forms, starts abandoning craving as it's happening, starts seeing where craving is going, seeing the painful cycle that it's tying oneself into, seeing the futility of it, and also experiencing the experience of release of it. The more one does that, the slower craving becomes, the less strong the attachments become. Eventually, that there comes a point where craving comes to a stop. It comes to a stop, and the fire goes out. Initially, just for a moment. But then eventually, one comes to a complete cessation of craving, where there's no burning anymore. he described as not arising in passive. Out. Out like a fire goes out. And that's what he was striving for. That's what he said. That's what he taught. The cessation of craving and all of the steps leading to that. He rarely went into long discussions because described it's not within the realm of conceptualization. Thinking through how it's simply the extinguishing of the burning experience that we're seeking. And the freedom, the ultimate freedom. Birth and aging and death, grief and mourning, pain and suffering, tension. That was his aspiration and his purpose, his legacy. Leave it there.